It is 4:30. I'm going to call this meeting of the Moorhead Public Service Commission to order. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Bless you. May I have a second?
I'll second it.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. Motion is approved. Let's see. Motion to approve the consent agenda. Any issues before we call for the motion?
John?
No issues.
No issues? Okay.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Motion, second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion's approved. Care minutes and bills. Customers to be heard, recognitions. Bill?
Have none.
Don't see any customers. No recognitions. Old business. Anyone have old business to attend to tonight? John?
Yes.
Okay. I always count.
Just like to thank staff for the added commentary on the bills to be paid. I noticed a few additions there and was helpful here for it. In my world, I'd like a little bit more, but I know it's not realistic here for it, but I really do appreciate that. Also, I think I sent out a article to a couple of staff and a couple of the commissioners regarding zebra mussels gaining footholds in Red River. I think that's an ongoing issue that we're going to have to talk to and address. And I don't know if you've seen it, Chris, or not, but you can just pass that. I got a copy before there as well. And then the final item, and Bill, you may want to comment about this here. Cheryl and I were joined several of the staff here a few weeks ago regarding customer service and some training and some, I guess, what their experiences are and the challenges that they're having with the multiple of different customers that come in to see them. And I think we had a pretty good open discussion. We shared our experiences and thoughts, and I'm not sure if I had to leave a little bit early before we closed, so I don't know if we had a specific time going forward. And that's maybe Nancy, if you want to comment, or Bill, here for the rest of the commissioners to get your thoughts on what we discussed as well.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say. Nancy might add to it, but yeah, we had a nice conversation. I mean, both John and Cheryl have good insight, good experience with customer issues, and so we talked through those. We talked about some of the training that we're having with more public service employees, and I think we're going to try and get together with the committee again and do some more follow-up. So other than that, I don't know if Nancy had anything.
I think that was a good summary. It was a good conversation, and we appreciate the comments from both John and Cheryl, and we'll keep working together, try to schedule something. I think we talked about having a second meeting about a month out.
Cool. Any questions? Heidi? No. All right, thank you, John. Is that it?
Okay.
All right. Moving on to reports. Heidi, anything from the city council this week?
I don't have anything.
All right, thank you. Members of the Public Service Commission. John, anything in addition to what you've already shared? Okay.
I have a quick one. We had the Lake Islay Water Authority meeting about 2 weeks ago. And this is the pipeline project to get the water from Missouri over here. So we're making big progress there. The biggest question right now is who's going to pay for it. So there's all kinds of ideas between a 5 to 95% cost share between the state of North Dakota and the participants down all the way to 65 to 35. So we're going through that right now. You know, we have not opted in to that, but I'm still sitting on the board, so it's interesting to see what's going on there. And I know staff is working with the city of Fargo as well to see what options could be. But at some point we'll probably have to make a decision, and I'm assuming if we're not a member, they'll kick us out of the board. They'll leave us our board seat, which would be fair. But it's very interesting to see. The price tag is $1.2 billion for right now. And a lot of the water systems are basically saying we may or may not be able to afford it, but it all depends on the cost share element at some point. So.
Ralph, didn't they add a number of communities in the last round? Interviews and kind of conclusions and so forth?
Yeah, we are now to basically the eastern half of the state.
Yeah.
So everything from, I think, Jamestown east would be in. There's a couple of other water systems, and they did that in last week as well, that basically are looking and going the same route we did. They have access to groundwater. It's the northeastern part of the state, Grand Forks and north, that have access to groundwater, so they're looking at the same thing. Would it be easier for them and cheaper, to be honest, to rely on that from the pipeline? But right now, it's, I think, 35 water systems are included in the project.
Well, we have an item on the agenda that has a little bit to do with that. Too.
So that's a quick update. Nothing to do, but it's just a quick update.
Okay, great. Bill, have you had any further conversation with the city administrator?
I have not, I don't know.
He had an idea a year or so ago that we talked about.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it internally.
Yeah.
Ralph has been engaged in those conversations. We haven't had another conversation with Fargo.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a
Not-
long-term,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, Ralph is on the board, so we're
Right.
monitoring it, but haven't
Not to keep
continued that
anybody in the
conversation.
dark, but the Fargo city administrator had approached us to just have a creative conversation about how it might be that we would still participate in the water project if several things happen and so forth. So I don't think, beyond that, I've never had another conversation, so.
Mhm.
Okay.
And it was very clear too in that meeting, it would be the largest public works project in the history of North Dakota. So this is not a small project at all. It's 220 miles of pipe and power plants and pumping stations, what have you. So it's a pretty big project. So it's not only building it, but maintaining it as well. So that's, I think, what people are looking at right now. What will it cost? How long will it take to build? And it's something that literally may not be used in our lifetimes. Right, but if it's needed, it will be needed immediately, and it will literally be a lifesaver, so,
It will be there when they need it.
when they need it, yeah.
Has it even been reviewed by our neighbors to the north or our own DNR?
Our own DNR is not involved apparently, so there's no idea that they would actually have a say in it, if you will. There have been, it's going through the federal approval process right now, and the belief is that at least the state of Missouri and maybe even Canada may challenge the court. And the basic idea is, the basic problem is, of course, you take water out of the Missouri, which is Western water law, and you put it into over a continental divide into a different water system, going far north into the red. So the assumption is something, they looked at illegal action. But at this point, that's too far out. But we have gotten some requests from Missouri and some indication from Canada, from the federal government, that they may not be happy about it. But we'll see how it all plays together. I mean, so far, it was a project that's been worked on for 40 or 50 years, I guess, and really has gained speed in the last 5. And all of a sudden, people may come to the board, may come forward, which haven't been out there in a while because it wasn't a project that was feasible. Now it has some degree of feasibility, and there may be, like I said, there may be pressure back. There is water treatment components in the plan, which makes it more expensive. But so what comes over would be treated. What comes over the continental divide, but will it be treated enough is the question. Could there be something in the water that won't be in? And then more importantly, the downstream states or users of the water up in Missouri, like Missouri is saying we're taking 120 CFS out per second. What does that mean for us in the water? So
There's a big question about the whole water cycle. When you remove that significant amount of water from the natural water system, you don't get that natural recharge, you end up with major consequences. You can end up with major consequences.
and the assumption, you've heard me say the same thing, and we have evidence that the Red River went dry for 3 years, almost 3 years in the 30s. The question then is, what did the Missouri do at the same time? Right? How low were the flows at that point? It wasn't dry, we know that, but how low were the flows at that point? And that's going to be a different discussion. And like I said, I mean, the project itself, I think the pipeline diameter is 72 inches right now. I think there's only one country on the planet that even makes pipe that big. Forget about putting it in the ground. Like that's a different discussion altogether. So it's an interesting project, but we'll see what happens. And I think the latest, like I said, the latest we have heard, it really comes down to who's going to pay for it. when you think about if we participated and we said, listen, here's a project which we will need if there is a drought, but we all need to pay for it from now on, right? I mean, this is a $1.2 billion project that's to be financed over 50 years. You know, what's the appetite for any community to say we're going to pay a big chunk of money to do that? Or should it be a state project, you know, that the state owns and pays for, and that's all like part of the discussion that are going on right now?
Lots of unknowns.
Yep. That was my update.
All righty. Still under reports, Mr. General Manager, Bill?
No, I have nothing.
Nothing. Boy, people quiet tonight. Item D is an item to accept updated report on electric transmission and distribution relocation for the city of Moorhead's 21st Street grade separation project. There's been a lot of activity over there.
Yep, always.
We've had to sign documents every other day.
Yeah.
You might bring everybody up to date on this.
Will do. Travis Schmidt, Electrical Engineering Manager. So what's been going on, of course, we got the 21st Street grade separation project. That started roughly July timeframe. ES has been working for about a year now, trying to relocate all of our transmission and distribution lines in that area. A good majority of our distribution, I should say, 40% roughly, was done last fall. We've been continuing on that since around about this spring. And then we were able to start our transmission relocation here a couple weeks ago. That's actually going really well. We've got roughly two transmission structures yet to put in the ground yet. Hopefully that'll occur this week. It all depends on railroad permits and getting everything signed off on. We were just, Commissioner Anderson and Nealon actually signed our master agreement with Ogden Valley Railroad, which is the one transmission structure we need to put in the ground yet. The other one is just an inline structure that they'll do once they start constructing the line itself, or putting the wire on the line. We're still continuing to install all of our distribution as well. We've got a majority of that done. Again, they signed off on a couple other amendments to the exhibits of the master agreement and then BNSF permits as well too. We're just waiting for conversation or communication back that we can move forward with those drawings as well. Hopefully those will occur. We probably got probably end of October we'll be finished with the distribution. Hopefully by the end of September we'll be done with the transmission side of everything. And we should hopefully be out of the way. We're still doing some relocations of the distribution lines that we had installed last fall that had to get relocated because of a force main on 22nd Street right by the high school. And that's probably what's going to take the most amount of time, I would suspect. So, but cost-wise, we're doing it in a way that's cost-efficient or cost-effective. We're having to put new wire in to replace new wire. So hopefully we'll have a better understanding of what those costs are in the future, but at this point we don't have yet the relocation of new wire. So other than that, Chris, I think you had a quick update you want to give on the water side.
Just a very brief update with respect to water. Just a couple of notes. Actually today we shut down one of our main transmission lines to southern Moorhead for the project so that pipeline can be relocated. That'll actually be shut down for about a 2-week period and then about another week period in the latter part of the month. In addition to that shutdown, that's why we have all that temporary water in the area, in case you're wondering, so that we can perform that relocation. In addition to that shutdown, the river shutdown is tentatively scheduled for October 15th in that area. So that's when we'll have to switch over to all wells. And so there'll be a message in the bills with respect to that changeover, because customers tend to notice a change in taste associated with that. So there'll be a message in the bills, but you'll probably see a press release as well. It just reduces our total capacity from about 10 MGE down to about 5.5 MGE. So we're limited on capacity during this 2-week period, which is why we specified a pretty short time frame for them to complete that portion of work. So hopefully it goes smoothly. Just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Questions, John?
Travis, there's a note there about 1,150 feet of electric, and I'm sure if you, I guess, already spoke to that, but what's the status of that? Is it still negotiation, or is there a dollar amount and agreement at this point, or?
Nothing yet. I'm still talking with Bob Zimmerman, Tom Trowbridge on it, trying to figure out, I think we need to know what the final cost is, but they're trying to figure out how to manage that as well too.
Okay.
It's a lot less expensive than boring a new wire just to replace what we just put in last fall, so I think we're still trying to figure out those costs, but yeah, we're working on figuring out how that's going to get handled.
Do we have an approximate dollar amount?
I
It's
don't,
hard.
not yet. We'll probably put some numbers together for the next update on the 18th.
Okay, thank you.
I asked Travis the same thing today, and he had a good response today too. It's a lot less expensive than replacing the line that we just put in last fall, moving it. So that's the encouraging part, but it will cost something. And it won't be a change order, it will be an additional charge.
Yeah, we still have to figure out those costs and how it's going to get handled. We had staff on site while they're relocating. We relocated about 650 feet roughly of wire already. We're waiting for them to close down 4th Avenue South and open up a trench there so we can move it at the same time. And then we'll move the rest of that 400 feet going north after that as well too. That being said, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time to finalize that, so.
Right.
Can you explain where was that, was it a miscommunication, was it a mistake, or what happened and all that? Who's responsible?
I think they're still figuring that side of it out. They decided, we had provided them where our locations were going to be and where they were once they were done. They didn't actually design or place that force main in that area till December, January timeframe after we had already located there. I don't think the engineering firm did a check of what facilities were there or get updated facility information. And I think that's part of what the issue was.
So will this financial burden then be put on the engineering company?
I'm letting Bob and Tom figure that out. So I don't think it's something that MPS should be having to pay for, but we're still discussing that.
So the engineering firm didn't update your locale?
Yeah, and along with a lot of other facilities as well too. Cable One, Mid-Continental, the other utilities engineering center underground. So
Really? There's a group of you involved in it?
yeah, there's multiple entities that are having to deal with relocations. So last minute relocations.
If I may, part of the problem with that was they added a second line in there. I believe it's a 16-inch line, so they had to widen everything out. And that wasn't done until January, March. Anyways, the dates are in there, but they added a second line in there that made everything wider, so to make the water and the storm and the force main bed, everything got wider. So
Their trench was wide.
Ralph? You good? Further questions, John? Well, keep us informed, man.
Will do.
We need a motion on that one. This is an item to accept.
I move to accept item number 8B.
I got a motion?
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. Motion is approved. Still under reports, item E, accept a report on strategic direction for facilities plan. Bill, you start now?
And I just want to explain, the next three items are strategic direction reports. So really what we're trying to do here is, have some strategic planning during our, planning meeting that we have out here. And these three are facilities plan, financial strength, and electric rates. And as we're talking about facilities and we're just getting into budget season, we'll be talking about how much those cost and what the impacts will be. Travis has a PowerPoint to kind of go over what we've been doing in the last few years, talking about different campus options and different locations. So I'll let him take over, and then we can have questions, after he's done, or during.
We should be careful though in our open meeting not to get into things that might involve real estate or properties.
And we do have, in our closed session, we'll be talking about more specifics. So,
Just a reminder to, okay.
good reminder.
Please pull up the PowerPoint slide.
This is the same one that's,
Yep, same one you got in your packet, so you don't want to break. Thank you. All right, so like Bill said, we've been looking at several different options over the past few years. We looked north, south, east, west. We looked at going up. Then we looked at doing a vertical expansion or making sure we could structurally handle that at what we call the Highway 75, this current location. We continue to look at that. Structurally, we can go vertical. Unfortunately, I think it's very costly to do that, and it impacts the whole operation on this site. So something that we looked at, but it doesn't seem to be feasible. It doesn't meet our future needs. It could help us short term, but the cost, I don't think, make that economically feasible. So we decided to not look at a vertical expansion on the site. We also looked at maybe building north of the water plant, but if we look at what happens in the future, and we'll go over that in a little bit, that also is a struggle we've got as well too. So we're kind of looking at a second campus as well too, mostly for the electric division.
So Joyce, when you talk about the vertical expansion, are you talking the water plant going up?
It would be this site right here, not the actual water plant itself, but this building and the west water plant is what we call it, doing a potential vertical expansion on these two sites here. So it adds some office space, but it doesn't add equipment and vehicle and material storage, which is a struggle that we've got, and we'll show that in a little bit. So we'll go over what the past has been, where we've been, the present, where we're at now, and what we're looking to do in the future. I kind of just gave you a quick synopsis of that. So we've been at this location for about 100 years based off the water division. The electric division actually has been here for about 25 years, and that mostly happened when we relocated away from the power plant. We've done multiple, as you see up there, multiple different renovations, additions to the site to make it work over the past 25 years. A lot has really happened in the last 5 to 10 years, from office additions to knock additions to lunchroom expansions, things like that, just to make the place workable. And as we go forward into the future, you'll see that it's going to continue to be, the electric division is going to continue to be impacted on this site. So we'll go from there. In the past, we've brought up, we've looked at multiple properties and actually purchased several outlying properties on the Highway 75 campus, those being the Idle, Bullock, and Van Raden properties. And if you can look below that, we've looked at properties to the north of us, up on 15th Avenue North by where the new MRF will be located. We've looked at all the properties north of 4th Avenue or 5th Avenue North. And then again, some of the properties south, which we've actually purchased some of those properties. And those were short-term purchases for the electric division, but long-term needs for the water division. So those were good purchases when we did make them. We've also talked about the McCarr Industrial Park, the 7 acres out by where the opportunity substation is. We've gone into conversations in previous commission meetings about those, along with the 20 acres on 34th Avenue South as well too. There's multiple other ones that we've looked at and tried to find a good option for us. We have an opportunity we'll talk about in closed session tonight that we won't go into any further detail on. As you can see, we've got a map there. Todd's actually got the map right there. So currently, if you look at anything in the red dashed area, is currently what we own on the Highway 75 campus. We've looked at doing vertical expansions, as you see in the green and red, maybe, and then if some of the yellows, you'll see some other future additions as you look at Todd pointing out on the maps. Again, you can also see what we've looked at potentially doing on the north side there as well, but we've decided to step away from that option of building up there. Currently, the strategic plan was to unite the MPS team. At one point, we had at one location, which was actually a good option to remove because this allows the electric division to expand in the future at a different location. Otherwise, we've all been stuck in the same area, which is going to be impactful to us in the future. So, from a financial side of things, we got to look at the water and electric division as separate financial units. We have separate budgets, separate reserve levels, and for the most part, all of our operations and staff are separate. We do have a little bit of crossover with a few staff, but mostly the staff are either water staff or electric staff. So, along with that, staff, CAS staff as well too.
That's a pretty impactful slide. You pause for a second and dig that in. That's a big change. Bill or Travis?
Well, I was thinking Jim could comment just a bit on that west area, that Idaho and Bullock area, and how, just where all the outside equipment is now.
Right, we still have, we purchased we call it the Hive over here, the west property, and then we put there used to be a beekeeper in there, so we call it, that's kind of like, but anyway, the property to the west, and we purchased that just before the expansion of the high service pumping station, which turned out to work out fantastic for us because with all the construction and the layout that they had of the material, they basically took up the whole back area. So in purchasing that, we were able to move most of our stuff over there, and it worked out very well for us. As far as, with the campus, with the properties being bought, plus the Van Raden, it's nice to get some of the equipment inside, but we still don't have a lot of the stuff inside. We do run from place to place, trying to get stuff organized for contractors and for us, which does take a little bit more time and in the future will impact us more so. We could, in the future, I think, we talked a little bit about the property to the west, maybe taking those buildings down and putting up like 100 by 300 buildings there. But there again, the cost of that, I believe, was roughly $5 million. So in looking at our expansion for the future, if we could get into one campus that would take us farther out, would be a better opportunity for us. And it'd make the flow of things and keeping track of things much easier.
Well, the reality is you're in the wrong part of town, right? Most of our town is south and east of where we are.
Correct. The expansion of the town will be south and mainly east.
South and east, so we're in long time.
So it puts us in a more central spot to get to places. There again, depending upon what we talked about in the closed session, we can go into that a little deeper.
Well, one question, if you don't mind, from my end. So to Chris, to put you on the spot, what's the likelihood of us moving the water plant in the next 100 years?
It would be so cost prohibitive, it would be very, very expensive. I mean, the current present value of the water facility at the site is probably $140 million.
Yeah.
So to move the location just doesn't, it's very cost prohibitive.
So what we need to make sure is that for the next 100 years, whatever it is, there's enough space around the water plant to do what the water plant needs to have done, right?
Correct. Yeah, I think there'll be continued purchase of properties as they come for sale, just to plan for the future. But until Chris is ready to expand or make several additions to the current water plant, I think you're about 2 additions out before you really are impacted by the space. And we'll show a little bit more of that in the future as well too.
So everybody knows as far as the potential sludge factory. Where are you anticipating that would be located on the map?
It's just north of.
So we're still looking at the on-site property.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just, it's actually indicated here on this map, it's just directly northwest of the existing water treatment facility.
Thank you.
And on that note, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a sludge treatment plant in Chicago that will do well. A week ago. Good call.
No, it was a mess.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, sir?
So.
Keep it
again,
freewheeling here.
What?
Just keep it
All
freewheeling.
right, sounds good. Presently, where MPS is at now, so short-term needs, like you said, we continue, like Joe said, we continue to we're running out of space here, or out of space. We do a lot of jockeying of equipment and materials to get things, loaded or unloaded or placed. Doing some rough calculations, that's probably about a 10 to 20% loss of work production that we can see as well too. And then again, with us relocating to the outbuildings of the site, besides staffing and trucks being just on the current campus or the current building, everything else actually is in the outbuildings or just out on the outskirts of the campus itself. So Joe talked about the 30,000 square foot building, that would be placed as well too. So that could be a potential need if we don't decide to not move forward with the opportunity in closed session. So water division expansions continue to impact and displace the electric division, continue to jockey around stuff. The high service pump station, like Joe talked about, we have properties outside of the existing area which help us out, but those are full. And as we add more equipment and more staff and things like that, you'll notice that it will continue to be impacted. The sludge plant will be another impact that we're going to have coming up in the near future. And we converted the Wellwood building this year to completely water.
Which one's the Wellwood one?
That's the big white building out here. Todd, you want to show?
Whatever, yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
So, green on the map. So, another potential need Chris might be seeing is a future parking expansion around the water treatment plant. Chris has done some remodeling for offices and labs as well too in the water plant, and I think Chris is actually fairly full over there as well too. There's not a lot of any space left for him. One thing we have to do remember is we do need to do maintenance around here as well, and we have several buildings, which is why we did the structural analysis last year, is trying to figure out what we're going to do. So we do have some costs coming up in the near future to do roof replacements on this building and the west water plant, the dispatch front office where you entered, and one of the line truck garages as well too needs it. And then two of the outbuildings need some roof repairs done as well too. So we'll be talking about that in budget season, making sure we accommodate those maintenance costs as well too.
Is that this budget season, or are you thinking next, or a combination?
We'll have to discuss that. It'd be nice to get it all done in one fell swoop, but I think it's going to need to be spread out over a little bit of time.
About a lot of money.
What?
There's a lot of dollars there.
Roughly about 800,000 in costs. So I've already talked about this. What we're looking at, we continue to leave. I think we leave the Van Raden building. Todd, you want to point that out? We'll continue to utilize that building, like we talked about. It's just based off what we're going to see in the future drawing here. It's just, it wouldn't be smart of us to build up there. It's going to be impacted by the water plant in the next 80 years, and I don't think it would be a smart use of money. So most staff would agree with that. If you look at the next, you see this is the ICO property, or the hive, as Joe noted. It's very full, and there's always, again, jockeying equipment around. Purchased this probably about 5 years ago, roughly. And we purchased the building just to the north about 3 years ago, if I remember right. Here's just a couple more pictures of placement of equipment. We've got all our transformers having to be located in containment areas. We've got a bunch of equipment that sits outside the fence due to just needing concrete to place everything on, which we don't have access to. So we are full.
Would it be for the transformers, is it preferred for inside storage, or does it make a difference?
Sometimes in the wintertime, it's nice to have a few inside, just due to the fact that if it's super, super cold and you need one, you gotta make sure that the liquids inside aren't frozen. There's been some issues with that, but a lot of just the regular mechanical switches and junction boxes, those don't have to be on the inside. But it's nice that we don't have to just take them and run and put one in if necessary. So some equipment inside is good, right, Joe?
Very good.
Well, and then anything green on that picture is expensive.
Yeah.
And theft is becoming more and more of an issue in the electric industry. They've talked about it quite a bit. Senator Amy Klobuchar was here in town talking about theft of electrical equipment, 2 or 3 years ago.
So the future, where MPS is going. So the vision, the overall facilities plan is what we're looking at. We expect the water, as Chris stated earlier, we expect the water division to stay located at the Highway 75 North Campus. Just due to the water treatment plant, the reservoirs, having everything just centrally located here. Chris has a lot of pipe in the ground that handles that. So, and then as we look at going into the future, growth area plan shows a population 85,000 by 2090, roughly. Taking some of that and extrapolated that a little bit further, I think the growth area plan only goes out to like 2040 or 2045. Chris will talk about that in a little bit here as well, as how they did that, because he's looking at it based off 1 million gallons a day numbers as well too. So that number came from the water division. MPS should prepare for a more centralized location, which will be talked about somewhere in the central, or in the 34th Street South and I-94 corridor. That's going to be the future center of town, and located in that area would allow us good access to the north to take care of everybody up in Oakport, along with being able to go south and east as well too. So separating the campuses is going to be something we think is a good idea. But primarily, south and central campus would be primary electric with some water equipment on that site, and the Highway 75 North campus would be primarily water. We would also leave some electric equipment up here as well too, just because of the overhead facility we have on the north side of town as well too. So, Chris, you want to go on and talk about your population maybe out today?
So kind of a lot going on in this slide. I'll try to walk through it slowly, but stop me if you have any questions. For water issues, we tend to look really long-term because we have to plan way out into the future. So actually, as part of our Buffalo Aquifer Management Plan, we did some future growth calculations with respect to water supply and treatment capacity. So looking out to 2090 and beyond for what we're going to need from a water supply standpoint and also for a water treatment standpoint. So a couple key points in the graph. There's a red line that indicates the current treatment capacity, and that's at 10 million gallons per day. So that's what our existing facility can safely treat and produce. You'll notice our projected maximum daily demand at the year 2030 exceeds that current capacity. So one thing looking out long term, around 2030 we'll need to do an expansion of the existing water treatment facility. So that's something we'll be keeping our eyes on as we go into the future. But from a planning perspective and from a just pure space perspective, you'll see that incorporated into a few maps that Travis will show down the line. So 2030 is roughly when our first expansion will come. 2060 is likely when the next expansion will come. So we'll probably do a expansion to about 15 MGD in 2030, and then 20 MGD in about 2060. Depending on, looking out that far is difficult from a projection standpoint, but roughly those two expansions in 2030 and 2060. And in the 2090 and beyond, we're looking to approximately a 30 MGD facility, so another expansion about 2090, 2100. So at least 3 expansions going on in the future, and that's what you'll see in the following maps on this presentation.
Ready?
Where are the population numbers coming from?
Those numbers come from MCOG, so we, like Travis mentioned, we used MCOG as a basis to forecast as far as we could, and then extrapolated out some of those calculations further. So
MCOG is calculating population in 2090 as over 80,000 in the city of Moorhead?
like I said, we calculated some of those forward, so 2045 is as far as MCOG actually goes. So we push those projections further.
So right where it hits a drastic hike up, that's just speculation?
Those are your terms? I mean,
On
Right.
it accelerates.
Right.
The drastic spike, Heidi, I was looking at it the same way, but there's 30 years, there's 20
Yeah,
years.
that's a good point.
There's 5 years.
So it goes in
It's
5-year
not
increments,
really
then 30,
Then it goes
line
to
then
graph.
30, from 2060 to 2090. So it's, again, with the caveat that it's
Oh, I
difficult to
see.
project.
It's probably,
You can't really look at it as a
It
line.
might be linear, it might actually be just linear.
Probably is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's-
Good point, though, good catch.
But even at
It does make it
2045,
look like a spurt.
but even at 2045, we need to have something happen before that, right?
The main point is, we'll be doing an expansion 2030 and likely 2060, so, and then from a planning standpoint, 2090 or 2100, we'll be looking at a third expansion. So, again, we have to look pretty far out to be able to project our needs and look at, from a space standpoint, how much space we'll need.
Well, we were chuckling here earlier, because when we saw 2030, we're like, that's way out, but it's
It's
12
not.
years, right?
It's only 12 years out.
Yeah. And from a budgeting standpoint, make sure those rate increases aren't drastic, so you don't see it. You know, a lot of communities, when they do expansions, have 20-30% rate increases on the water side. That's why we look this far out, is to try to plan those expansions and infrastructure improvements in a thoughtful way.
Just
Go ahead, John.
Just to expand a little bit on Heidi's question here, as far as, depending on population growth is going to dictate if and when this happens. To do a remodel or an expansion, how many years would that take? So I guess specifically here, if we saw in 2025 that population growth hasn't been what the estimates are, we don't have to do anything. But if it has more growth than we are anticipating, so I guess again, is it a 2-year project, a 3-year project, or?
You know, just using the Fargo Water Treatment Plant expansion as a planning basis, it's a 2 to 3 year project. So absolutely, John, you know, as we get closer to 2030, if it looks like, you know, we're not going to need that expansion for a few more years, we'll absolutely hold off. This is just purely from a long-term planning perspective.
But it just gives you a better handle how reactive that the utility is going to have to be.
But I kind of alluded to the rate impact. You probably want to know 5 years out, you know, what you're going to do on a water treatment upgrade. Because, for example, Fargo's upgrade was $120 million. Our upgrade isn't going to be that expensive, but it's still going to be a big rate impact. So even, you know, 10 years out, you know, we're 12 years out right now, starting to think about that, and I just starting to plan for it. Those are good things to do.
It might be a good idea to cite these sources so that it's right on the page for us.
Sure.
Particularly, you know, pulling her off the shelf, looking at it down the road. You know, then we know where to go if we want to do some quick revisions. But you know, whether it's MetroCog or State of Minnesota or whoever. But good question on what the source is. Lots of people throw darts at targets, and, you know, so. Okay.
as you can see here, these are the colors in orange there are the areas where they've just completed some of the growth area planning studies. We look everything's east and north of the interstate, and then south of 50th Avenue South.
And that's the city?
Yeah, the city
Okay.
did their growth area planning in this area over the last They just finalized those, I think, last year, if I remember right, or maybe just a year prior to that. So, and those, I don't remember how long those we were looking at, or how long they forecasted on those. So that might be just to 2040, 2030, 2045, somewhere in there. But that's where they're expecting the growth to occur in town. So again, looking at that, it's gonna, the corridor of 34th Street and 994 will be should be the central location further down the road.
I'm picking nits here, but the map in your PowerPoint is really stretched,
Yes.
skewed.
Yeah.
It changes the shape of the city.
Oh.
You know, so if anything, it ought to be a lot more vertical. So I'd just suggest for future presentations, change the map.
Okay. How do you want to go to that future map? So, as Chris talked about, you're going to continue to see expansions here, 2030, 2060. Chris has placed a large plant in here for that 2090 range or so. That would be a great plant, I think, Chris potentially could be. Along with, he's got his sludge facility noted. He's got, as long as he's got his ACE2 expansion, he has to do these two as well. We're also talking about future reservoirs. As you know, they continue to grow, or the additions that the water division is going to continue to have. It's going to impact that whole campus, that whole area to the north of the current water plant.
And just remind us again, why do we need the reservoirs? Doesn't we have the water towers?
It's good to have the storage on the site itself, just because our high service pumping station is at the site, so we want to store the water as close as we can to the high service pumping station. Certainly some of our storage as we go forward will be incorporated in towers as the city continues to grow, but if we can keep more additional reservoirs on the campus, it's preferable.
So when do you use the water in those reservoirs? Is it for emergency situations when you need to pump more water out? Or?
Yeah, so the current reservoirs are they're used all the time, 365. They're always full of water. And the main reason we store so much water is fire flow. So just making sure we have enough water on hand for fire flow situations.
Next.
So we're going to go, now we'll talk about the financial considerations on this. Looking to relocate the electric division, we've got roughly $20 million in the budget in the early 2020s or so.
What does that mean, $20 million?
We've kind of put it as a placeholder.
Okay.
Or earmarked it as, something we're probably going to need to do something. With that, that's all based off construction. We talked to several other utilities that have built new dispatch operation centers or new electric division buildings in the recent past. And looking at those numbers and what those costs were, it's about $20 million to build a site or a building that would suffice us for a long time. That's roughly got about a 4% rate impact to the customers.
Over how much time?
Over about 20 years, Nancy, or so.
It would be a 20-year bond, but it would be a 4% increase one time, but that's factored into our plan, so we would probably ramp up and ramp back down a little bit to get that net 4%.
And there's a potential there too, depending on what we do, that we could, it might be more cost effective to do it a different way. We have to look at other options as well too on the financing side of things. So,
Yeah, if you could do that, I think that'd be helpful for all of us if we saw what the scenarios are. $20 million is a lot of money.
So, on the other side of that too, we're talking about just the dispatch operations center side of things. Like Chris talked about for water towers and reservoirs and his expansions as well too. We have other expansions that potentially could happen as well too on the substations and transmission lines as well too. And as John asked, when does it happen? I mean, we just have to watch it. It's all load based for the electric division as well too. So those could come up, they could get delayed as well too. So you have to watch that as well. But those come through in the master plan that we have on the electric side.
Are you doing the same sort of projecting on the electric side, toward these target years that Chris was just talking about?
Similarly, yeah, we're working to get our master plan ready for the 2020 budget season, so we'll see something next year on that, and that should give us some updated forecasts. Usually we try to have 2 substations planned for in that period of time frame.
Yep.
They may happen, they may not. It just really depends on the loads. And right now, we're very flat on our loads as well too, so it's, you're gonna see a lot of energy efficiency happening, so it's.
Not at my house.
You're a good customer.
Yeah, I must be. I was just complaining to Bill about that this morning. That's all.
Nancy, do you have anything else financial side of things?
When we talk about the budgeting or the forecasting, we do the 10-year forecast, so things like, like a new operations center on the electric side, or the next expansion of the Buffalo Wells on the water side, they're in the plan, but they're very movable as far as when we need to do that. The questions that we're always asking is, when is the time, when are the triggers? So we're looking at the load, we're looking at the population, we're looking at the volume of sales in order to justify those. So very movable within that 10-year plan. We try to be a little bit more specific in the 5-year plan. The 10-year plan is definitely a planning tool. But we project not only the capital expenditures, but all the other operating expenses that go into creating our rates also.
I know we use MRES, for a lot of that kind of support and professional background and so on. Are there any other sources or any other ways that we look at what's going on in the industry to see if we're reinventing wheels or if somebody had already been out there and done the innovations on some of these things? I'm just curious.
Are you talking rates, or are you talking?
I'm talking about the kind of the projections and planning and such. How is it, what are the models that we use to?
Well, like Travis mentioned,
plan that.
the master planning,
Mhm.
and that's done right now by DGR. Other companies, consulting engineers do those types of things.
Yep.
But that's really the basis for the expansion of the electric system. Not facilities per se. They can look into that, but that could be a different investigation.
They're looking at it based off load, based off voltage, capacity of the lines, and then from there they say, well, we need to maybe put a feeder in here, or we need to upsize this feeder, or add some capacitance into the line. They're looking at multiple different things, and once they see a certain load or voltage, then they, at this point, you're not going to need a new substation in this area. So.
They're everywhere across the Midwest, it seems.
They're based out of Rock Rapids, Iowa,
Yeah.
but they serve a lot of municipal utilities in the Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa area.
So Chris, if the city goes east, do we need another water tower on the east end? We're building south next, right?
We would, yeah. That's one of the locations we're looking at.
The south is going in next year or the year after?
South is, we're hoping to start next year. It won't be completed until 2020, mid-summer 2020. Something we'll look at in the budget process.
John, anything?
Well,
Where do I start?
I appreciate all the effort that has been put into this here. I'm just kind of wondering here if Heidi, if you think the council would like to have something in the future of saying that if the growth is going to be like the projections are, this is how it's going to impact the utility and what kind of expansion needs that we have. Because I didn't anticipate this kind of impact here for it. So it's really, and again, I realize it's planning stages and seeing what potentially can happen, and you've got to plan and be prepared for it. Not necessarily it's going to happen, but I guess we see growth and we see the metro area, and I would think that we got a chance of seeing continued growth in our metro. But to what extent here? But I think this is really valuable information, and we should share it. Maybe early, but
Early.
yeah.
I'm concerned for a number of reasons. There's a lot of red flags for me. That one chart I can't get out of my head, looking into 20, 90, 70 years down the road, that is a very long time to make any kind of even preliminary projections. And I don't know why you would ever want to do that, other than to put an idea out there to get it supported. I don't know, there's a lot, it would have been nice to see this type of planning done with city engineers, to have a conversation about where and how much growth we expect to go in certain places. Because I know that Bob is anticipating a limited amount of growth in certain areas. While it might be city-owned property, it's not slatted, whatever, to be developed.
Well, the good thing, though, this is just preliminary discussion
Exactly.
purposes here. So like you said, it may be way too early to be doing that sort of thing. But I guess I'll leave here, but I think as far as you can say, a utility, you have to have projections and see how it may impact you. And like we said, we don't know at this point, so it's just...
Correct, but to plan just for utilities, it seems foolish. It seems a waste of time and money without planning with the city. If you're going out and planning for the infrastructure and not knowing what the city's planning or what the city's ideas are you spinning your wheels, or you get the horse getting before the cart?
I like the idea.
Where is our collaboration?
Yeah, I like the idea of getting, alongside of each other.
Right.
We've done this, Bob or Tom or, the whole team, what have you got that we can compare and really evaluate based on where they think we're going as well. That's not bad.
But also it's good for the city to see if this expansion growth happens, this is how it's going to impact.
Right, and I think that's a
utilities.
great, that's a great point, because we know that new rooftops cost more money than remodels and refurbished renovations. And Bob and Tom are aware of that too. And so are we going to keep pushing south and east when we know that it's cheaper for you guys, it's cheaper for our users to look at more plans like the 505 years. Let's focus downtown. Maybe our center isn't going to go anywhere. Maybe it will.
I guess that's why you're our liaison.
Yeah, I think it is good, we're having a conversation on where we're going to locate possibly the electric division. I mean, one of the big things we talked about in our last strategic planning discussion was, do we unify, the campus? Do we, stay at this location? Do we, when the city needs more area in the city hall, if they end up staying there, do we locate here? We have an opportunity to do that. We talked about that. As Travis mentioned, we didn't keep that in our strategic direction, so we kept it, not at one location. One of the reasons that we're talking about this is we're going to talk about in closed session where we have an opportunity. If we don't take advantage of that opportunity, this conversation will continue over the next few years. Travis's electric master plan does just like you're talking about. We take a look at the growth area plan, we take a look at where, Bob and Chris are looking at developing in Moorhead. And then that'll make a difference on where we put our substations and other facilities. So I mean, we've got a conversation happening, and it'll happen over the next few years. It's not all happening tonight. And, but there is something that we're going to talk about in closed session tonight. And so this is some background information. It can be developed further if we decide to delay any action in closed session. And I know that's a big teaser, but part of this is because of an opportunity that we're taking a look at. But I mean, we are looking for your direction, and if we decide to stay here, that doesn't hurt my feelings. And we'll continue to talk about that over the next few years while we do the master plan, et cetera. If we go downtown versus south and east, you know, that affects the master plan, might affect facilities. This may be a great location to stay for long term. But at the same time, the water division is going to expand, and they're going to expand in the core, and they're pushing electric to the fringe, even on this property. And so we're spread out, and it's not efficient. And I was going to have Joe talk just a little bit about that long yellow building on the side there. Because really, if you look at where, even from this aerial, where all the equipment is spread out, you can tell that it's not efficient, you know, every day for our crews to go and pick up equipment. That long building would help with that.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I guess I was gonna maybe talk a little bit more in closed session so we could be a little more open with it. But as stated earlier, you know, looking at the costs and just with the remodeling of the building that we did, the 100 by 200 building, when we looked at putting one just to the south of that a few years ago, it was over $1 million. And we went back and looked at it 2.5 years later, and it had over doubled, I mean, with the price of things. From the operation, as Steve Moore, he looks at that every day, you know, even the city has different areas where they move equipment from or do it, it's all not in one spot. So looking to the future, to get stuff to serve, you know, with the addition of Oakport and all the way down to Tessa, the town is actually pretty long now. So, in the possibility of moving to a different area or to be able to make it easy to get to both places, you know, we're trying to look at everything. Operations-wise, we see that every day. You know, you don't have to look out to the future and projections or whatever. We deal with that every day.
And like you said, the city deals with that too.
Right. So all we're trying to do is show a future of where we could be, what might be beneficial to us, and take a peek at it and see what everybody says. And as Bill says, maybe look at an opportunity that will be financially way in our best interest.
Talk just for a second about that, you know, that yellow building on Longman. How would your, you know, just a typical day where your crews would come up and pick up equipment? I'm assuming they're driving through that type of facility. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's.
Right, if you were to take the properties there and combine them into one building, you would bring it together versus, we call it Van Raid property, versus running up there to get our wire. We have just our wire supply in there fills up that entire building. And we still have stuff on the outside. We don't have our interducts or our basements or all that other stuff. So we're probably scattered, if you look at that, at least 5 or 6 different spots. And it's not that they're so far apart, it's just that you're running to each area to get that opening buildings, closing, bringing the trucks. It just all adds time. So there again, we're just looking to the future to be more efficient and a long-range plan. Whether or not you go to 2090 or not, I could see a one central area in the next 5 years to be very crucial, to be very efficient and take us out and not have to worry about it and keep the rates down where you're not spending all that extra money. Because as we know, you can see it with the price of a vehicle or anything, or equipment. Our equipment has doubled in 10 years. So if we could get someplace for a long term and not have to worry about that, then we're saving everybody money.
But a 4% rate increase is a significant amount of money. For a rate.
That was for the $20 million bond. If we didn't have to do that, there again, as we talk in closed session, I didn't know how far we wanted to go. We could be a lot less than that.
Heidi, with her questions, actually kind of generates a lot of curiosity in me, at least, for how it is that we could really start to effectively move forward, but not just as a utility, but really as a community. And I just took a little aside moment there with our city manager who's sitting in the gallery to suggest that maybe we ought to spend this Saturday together with all the smart people in this room, as well as some smart people that aren't in this room, from the city departments that would be involved, as well as MetroCog, and have a growth 2050 conversation. Bigger horizon, whether it's 2050 or whatever. But what if we put our heads together so that we're all kind of on the same feedback, so that we're all really kind of pointed in the same direction with the same assumptions that would drive some decision making, not only by a utility, but by a street department, by a highway department, by and with the guidance that I think we'd like to get from MetroCog in transportation planning and such. But the underpass project, I think, is a good example of how not to do it next time. And so if we start talking about some of this stuff, early enough on, and to consider where the resources are and where the talent is and where the smart people are that can pull together all these details, it seems maybe we could solve a lot of problems in the future, but also set aside the assumptions or the tendency to mistrust or whatever, and all be working down the same path. It's just a thought, but Heidi, your questions, I think generate a lot of appropriate additional questions, but also point out some opportunities for us to do better than we have done.
I think there's huge opportunities.
Yeah.
We talked, it was mentioned twice, that the city runs around, Public Works, they run around like crazy, gathering parts and whatnot.
I saw your director carrying a ladder today. So he's even carrying a ladder.
He's even carrying equipment around.
Yeah.
So for both if both entities are running around, wouldn't it make sense? Wouldn't it be, just to me, it seems like it would be much more cost effective and make a lot more sense if we collaborated on a project together,
Yeah.
so that we're not all running around.
I think you guys are, aren't you?
We're talking.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a lot of detail just yet, but we're in conversations with city officials.
Okay.
And fire, right? We talked to fire, and so, good point.
Those are casual, it may be that it would be helpful if we started
Yeah.
to pull it together a little bit more.
I haven't been privy to those conversations, so I don't know.
If, a chat with fire, a chat with police, whatever it is, but if we really did start to understand that we are talking, that we are sharing ideas and maybe collaborating on something. Yeah?
Well,
John?
again, my observation from this is that we can't continue operating like we're a little town anymore.
That we're what?
We can't continue operating like we're a little town anymore. We
Two
have
little towns.
2 little towns. We have potential of becoming a pretty large city, and we need to work as a large city.
Anything else on this topic that we need to, you've heard from us.
So want to go over the conclusion?
You've heard from us. What conclusion? This is no.
We can continue working, and like I said, we'll continue to work on this and talk to staff, but again, it's a long-range plan. We've got to prepare for it, whether we build a building or do something else. That building's got to be around for a long time, so it takes a lot to figure that out. So we're tight on space, adding staff, adding equipment, there's not much room left around here, so.
Yeah. We've got 2 more strategic direction items, they shouldn't take too terribly long, but.
I was about to ask, depending on how long you think
We'll just
close
give a-
is going to go,
Yeah.
and how late you guys want to be here tonight.
Yeah,
Do
we
you
just
want
do.
to accept that report?
Oh, yeah, I should probably take a motion. or
I move to accept the report.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. Item F, to accept the report on strategic direction for financial strength. Bill, then Nancy?
Yep. Well,
Okay.
I mean,
Or
as far
Nancy,
as,
but-
yeah, again, just a strategic direction, talk about financial strength, we're concerned about our bond rating, which is affected by a wide variety of things. I'll pass it off to Nancy to talk about it.
Nancy Lund, Admin and Finance Manager. Overall, MPS's financial credit rating is in really good shape right now. I mean, we're still at a credit rating of AA3, which we earned back in 2012, and we've continued to hold that. The question for the commission tonight would be if we should be striving for something higher. And let me go back and explain what that credit rating means to us. So it is a rating that is done by Moody's Investor Services, and it's basically an analysis of the risk from the creditors when they buy our bonds, when we sell bonds. We talked about selling bonds for facilities, for water projects and things like that. So Moody's does that review for us right now. So the rating is a AA3. The rating affects not only MPS and the interest we pay on when we finance things with selling bonds, probably affects the interest rate by 25 to 50 basis points for MPS. It also affects bond ratings of those other entities that we're partners with or departments of, such as the city. So the city benefits when our credit rating is good. Missouri River Energy Services benefits when we have a good credit rating. So it is broader than just the MPS perspective. It is a good thing for the rest of our partners. So what we did is I went out and looked to our financial advisor, who was Paul Steinman with Springstead Incorporated, and looked at some options of what we could do if we wanted to make a step and increase our credit rating from AA3 up to maybe AA2, what we would have to do, where we would have to go in the financial world to accomplish that. He gave us a couple good ideas on what we could do. The most immediate influence with the short-term results would all be in the financial strength and liquidity areas. So the one that he talks about most is we could look at our reserves policy. We did that at the end of 2017. We increased our reserves policy. We are on track to reach our new goals of 200 days of reserves on the electric division and 225 days of reserves on the water division. So we are making that move. It's a good step. We hope to be there either at the end of 2018 or at the end of 2019. So, I mean, rate-wise, purchase power-wise, things like that, we're just in a good place right now to reach that goal. So that's the one thing that he talked about the most. The other challenging part would be to take a look at our electric rates and try to become more competitive or position ourselves to be a little bit more competitive on that. We'll talk about that in the next strategic item. But if you want to look at the chart that's on page 2 of 3 of the agenda item, you'll kind of get a history of where we're at. The chart is on the bottom half of the page. I've got 2012 ratings there, 2016 ratings there, 2017 ratings there. You'll see some categories of things where we rate AA, and you'll see some categories where we rate just an A rating. So the focus would be on those A-rated categories to see if we can make some decisions that will have, a short-term result for us. And again, rate competitiveness, number 4 there, rate competitiveness, we rate an A. Financial strength and liquidity, we've teetered back and forth between a AA rating down to an A rating, up to a AA rating. So we've got some stability issues there I think we're working on. What we do occasionally is we draw from our reserves to do special projects, and then we do replenish those reserves, so not a problem. I mean, overall, the trend is there and the trend is good. But we do occasionally need to use those reserves for unbudgeted items that come up, things like power plant demolition, things like that. But we do have a plan in place to restore those reserves. So the question tonight is, whether the commission is content with our AA3 rating, or whether we'd like to try to push that a little bit farther up in the credit world to a AA2.
You indicated a reward for doing so, or a payoff of some sort. But besides having a lot of cash squirreled away and so on, what's the benefit?
The benefit is lower financing rates when you finance. MPS itself doesn't finance every year, so we go out to the bond market about every third to fourth year is generally where we've been in the bond market. But our partners, like the City of Moorhead and Missouri River Energy Services, are out in that bond market annually.
Yeah.
And so for them, it maybe helps them with their bond rating and their bond interest a little bit more frequently than it does with ours. But 25 to 50 basis points would be the estimated savings for us when we go to the bond market.
So,
Go ahead, John.
the city has the same rating as a utility right now, correct?
The city does have the same rating as the utility right now, and it is unique for the utility to have a rating as high as the city. Normally, the city's rating will be higher because they normally issue general obligation bonds, which just because they have the taxpayer basis or taxpayer base behind them, has better credit rating than a utility.
So it would be unusual then to have a utility rated higher than the city.
That might be pushing it. Our financial advisor says we may be positioned to do that. Maybe, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'd have to check with him to see if that would help the city also increase their rating.
Well, I guess I would be surprised here from my experience that the utility would have a higher rating than the city, since we're city-owned. So we should do some really strong research here if we're going to be moving our financial strengths to increase cash reserves. If it's just going to be building up cash, like David said, and we're not going to get the benefit, because the city's rating obviously is good, but I don't know how much we're going to have the ability to change the utilities rating if the cities does not go up as well. But that's just something to research.
Good point.
And the other thing is too, even if we build the cash reserves up the next 2 years, we have some massive projects coming down the pike for which we may need to go into the reserves in the first place, then we go back down and we lose our rating.
Well, I think our customers even have an expectation that if we build up that kind of cash, we would use it rather than have a lot of cash. We have some customers out there that I think would be fairly unforgiving depending on how high that balance grew and if we were unwilling to touch it. That's just, I don't think that'll fly very well. I've always been a supporter of the appropriate level of reserves because there are those rainy days and those stormy days and those catastrophic things that come along, and it has allowed us to respond. But boy, I get nervous if we start talking about cash that is cash for cash sake.
And especially if you have to justify a rate increase, at some point in time, somebody's gonna catch on that, well, you keep putting cash away, you keep squirreling money away in the reserve, but yet you keep increasing my rates.
I think the other thing to remember, and we'll work with the city in order to do this and collaborate on this as well, is they may be looking at an upgrade.
Yeah.
Paul Steinman works for both of us, and he's got opinions on where we should be. So I'm positive that he has opinions on where they should be, and we could work together in order to make sure that we're both moving up together.
Yeah.
Because I know Missouri River works that way. They moved up shortly after we moved up. They were actually shocked that we moved up in the rating. But now what they're hearing from the rating agencies is there's an adjustment going on throughout the industry, and Missouri River is in line for another upgrade.
Yep.
I'm guessing that we're in line for an upgrade if we just tell our story, and we wouldn't want to miss out on that opportunity, to see that. So we're listening to people like Paul to position us well, and then decide whether or not the benefit is worth the cost.
When can we talk to Paul?
Well, Nancy's, talking to them Wanda's talking to him continuously.
But as a board, I think it'd be fruitful for
Oh, he
us.
would, yeah.
Because we haven't had that conversation
Mhm.
in a long, long while.
He would be willing to come up and visit with the board. Generally, you normally just see him when we're doing a bond sale, and sometimes it's just the city council that he'll visit with on Monday night.
Yep.
But I'm sure we could ask him to stay on a Tuesday and visit with this board also.
Well, that's a good point, Bill, that if we're going to be working with the same guy as the city, to see if that's something that the city is, probably, Chris, you're probably more aware of it already for it, so, but I guess the comment here that I would go to his letter that he sent here to us. I'm sure Nancy is very familiar with his ratios that he's using.
Yes.
I don't know if everybody else is that comfortable with his ratios without an explanation what there are. So maybe just a favor of him is just say that accountants and controllers aren't the only people who are reading this. So maybe just add some explanation or definitions here in some of the ratios of the stuff he's using. So I think it would just be beneficial for the general.
In his letter.
Yeah, in his letter, or his correspondence is
Absolutely.
to us here for it is, I think it would be helpful for us to, when we're looking at debt ratio and how many people understand debt ratio, how it's calculated, why it's important to us here for it, so. And I don't expect him to go into that much details, but it would just be, I think, beneficial for us to have a little better explanation of what his.
All right, and I think we've got those definitions in the Moody's
Yep.
rating brochure too, so we can pull those out of there also.
Good.
That would help this old history major to understand. Poli-sci and psych. I was lousy at economics. So. Anyway, what else do we need to do on this one besides maybe accept the
Just
register?
accept
Okay, I take a motion to accept.
Move to accept.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Item G, accept report for strategic direction for electric rates. How much do
Shouldn't
we have to
spend
talk
too
about
much
there?
time on this, we are gonna be doing a rate study,
Okay.
but Nancy, why don't you hit the high points here?
So here we're looking for, support that we're going the right direction in doing the electric rate study. We're monitoring our competitiveness, looking at where we want to be in that competitive world, and then looking at some demand components in our electric rate, which will happen in the electric rate study. So the study's underway. Our consultant is Tim Miller from Missouri River Energy Services. He's collecting a lot of data. He'll be meeting with staff for the first run-through of that in mid-September, and then it will come to the commission in mid-October. We have invited city staff to come and take a look at the street lighting portion of that study too, so they've been invited. They'll spend an hour and a half with us to take a look at that. That's a slowly or a quickly evolving piece as we look at, what their streetlight utility is doing, the revenues it's collecting, what our costs are, and as the city is asking us to perform more services for that streetlight utility, we thought it was very important to have them at the table during that discussion. What we found on the second page of the agenda item, I've placed the Moody's competitiveness rating categories on there, and as far as rating goes, we are solidly within an A rating on our rates. And the question for the commission would be, if we feel that we could step up to that AA rating on rates, we would have a little bit of work to do that. What we found is that when we do our local comparisons, it's not exactly the same comparison that Moody's is doing when they look at rates. So in the local market, when we're comparing with Cass County Electric or Excel, we're doing very well and we show to be competitive, and we probably, if we were going to do a bond rating based on that, we would be AA. But when we go out into the broader Minnesota average rates, we don't fare quite as well on the industrial and the commercial electric rates. So
But that's meaningless.
Pardon me?
That's meaningless, though. I mean, they're not the people we're competing with.
That's what we would tell the Moody's.
Yeah, we're competing with people that aren't in Minnesota.
Yep. I mean, that would be part of our story.
Yeah, and we did it before.
Mhm.
I was with you.
Mhm.
overall, both the reserves and the rate competitiveness are each only 10% of the ratings. So we do step up to the AA rating by the other categories. So it's not critical that we make steps here, but if there were things that we wanted to work on and try to improve a little bit, the reserves, which were there, and the rates were locally competitive.
Those are each 10% of Moody's criteria.
Moody's total
Just to give you an
100% rating
idea.
criteria.
So they've got a big bunch of categories.
An interesting conundrum.
Yeah. And like Nancy said, we're working on both of them. So there's a balance there, but we're doing everything we can to keep the rates down.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd almost move your top section over into the AA, because I don't know what else we could do, compared to, the other people that are in our community,
Well, hopefully,
that we really are competing with, I suppose.
over the next couple of years, as we look, and we've got stability in our purchase power costs right now. Transmission is still going up, at purchase power is stable.
Yeah.
We've got a transfer agreement, those are our biggest expenditures, so I think we've got stability in all of those different pieces of the budget right now. So it may be that we will be able to pick up a little bit more competitiveness in those industrial and commercial rates.
Gentlemen, anything? I accept the motion.
Make a motion.
Got the motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Item G is approved or accepted. I have a script.
If you're going to throw it at the
This meeting will now be closed for executive session as authorized by Minnesota Statute Section 13D.05, subdivisions 3C, to discuss agreements between MPS and the City of Moorhead concerning real property interests with respect to the City of Moorhead and the 20th Street grade separation project. And B, as authorized by Minnesota Statute Section 13D.05, subdivision 3C, to discuss a possible property transaction involving parcel number 06.005.1600 in Clay County. And C, as authorized by Minnesota Statute Section 13D.05, subdivision 3C, to discuss possible property transactions involving parcel numbers 58.470.0010 and 58.470.0090 in Moorhead. Possibly be, are we gonna, let's see. Possibly, okay. As authorized by Minnesota Statute Section 13D.05, subdivision 3B, and permitted by the attorney-client privilege to discuss possible litigation related to aquifer protection issues. John, do you expect that we will be taking action?
I think it's possible that we'll take action.
It might be, okay, so stay tuned. So we will be returning after executive session, likely returning after executive session.
Well, you'll have to return.
Yeah, okay, so,
Regarding this issue, the 2021,
Yes.
do I need to excuse myself from being on the city council?
I don't think so. So, we're in closed session? Oh, okay.
I move.
Give me a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion's approved. We're in closed session. So now I do have the power to open this meeting again. I hereby open this meeting. Two motions or one? One motion. One motion. I'd entertain a motion based on the work that we completed in closed session. Second.
Yes. So I move to authorize more public service staff to engage professional services to enter into negotiations for an option to purchase a 5-acre tract within parcel number 06-005-1600, and to approve professional services to complete a survey of the property and approve all necessary documents to complete the property transaction contingent upon final approval by Attorney John Boulder.
Have a motion, do I have a second?
Yes, I will.
Yeah, I thought seconds as easy as red. Yeah. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion is approved. A couple of quick notes. I will not be available for the next 2 meetings. So I'll be out of town to Sioux Falls in 2 weeks, and then I'll be out of town on vacation in 2 more weeks. So use that however you like. He's in charge. So, and then some meetings coming up that I would urge you all to take a look at. Looks like a couple of good sessions with ABP. So, other than that, Bill?
And then Thursday night, you two guys, you want to meet it for MRS?
Wherever we need to.
Right, yeah.
Okay. We're adjourned.